And welcome to Boundless Accelerator Presents Toolkit Tuesday. I am Alex Miller, the program coordinator at Boundless Accelerator, and I'm happy to be here with you today for this exciting session. I'd like to first welcome our American Sign Language interpreters, whose time today is graciously provided in kind by Asign. Jocelyn and Jennifer, thank you both for joining us, and thank you, Asign. While I'm at it, I'd also like to thank our corporate sponsors, Danby, Synergetics, and Invest Wealth. We are very grateful for their support in all we do. Before beginning today's session, I would like to first give recognition to the land that Guelph is on. We acknowledge that many others here today may be on different territory, so we invite and encourage each of you to give recognition to the land you occupy today and every day. As we gather for today's event, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. Today, as people who work and live on this land, we are responsible for its continued stewardship. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe people, of whose traditional territory we are meeting. Today's webinar is called IP Initiatives and Strategies for Tech Startups and will be presented by Josée Pharand and Rochelle Lee from Communitech. So first, a little bit about the organization. In case some of you are new to Boundless Accelerator, here's a quick history lesson. Boundless Accelerator was established in 2010 as Innovation Guelph and is one of 17 regional innovation centers in Ontario. We are proud to share with you that we won many awards for our leadership in advancing Canadian entrepreneurs across the country. Yes, the country. While we are located in Guelph, Ontario, we serve the entire region of Southern Ontario and have one national program. This means that while most of our clients are located within the Toronto and Waterloo corridor, we do have clients in BC all the way to Nova Scotia and throughout most of Canada. We work with our clients, supporting them throughout multiple stages of business growth, from startups to scale-ups, with many other programs and workshops, networking opportunities, and professional introductions. Recently, we introduced a brand new consulting division for larger startups with over $1 million in annual revenue. However, this information is on our website at boundlessaccelerator.ca. You can visit it at any time. Today, we're here not to listen to me, but to hear from our very interesting presenters. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Josée Pharand and Rochelle Lee. So Josée is passionate about intellectual property and loves helping founders protect their IP. At Venture Labs, as Venture Labs Director of Intellectual Property Programs and Policies since 2021, Josée has supported hundreds of clients in identifying and protecting their intellectual property, working with them to create tailored IP strategies aligned with their product, roadmaps, and business objectives. Josée has a Bachelor of Applied Science in Mechanical Engineering from Queen's University and is a registered professional engineer in Ontario. She spent several years in the private sector before joining the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, CIPO, and discovering her passion for IP. Next is Rochelle. Rochelle Lee is a dynamic program manager at Communitech, driving with the education and awareness initiatives within the Elevate IP program. With extensive client-facing experience, she excels in program execution and community engagement. Rochelle's passion for innovation and inclusivity extends to her role as Events Director for Women in Communications and Technology, where she creates empowering spaces for women and underrepresented groups. Her commitment to impactful initiatives and strong relationship building defines her professional approach. Should you have any questions for Josée or Rochelle today during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature or the chat box, and we will monitor your questions and ask them when the moment is right or at the end of the session if time allows. Thanks for joining us today. Over to you, Rochelle.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Alex, and thanks for having us, Boundless Accelerator and Alex. I'm going to share my screen now. Great. So just a short overview of the Elevate IP program here. We will get into it right away. So Elevate IP is a federally funded program designed to help Canadian startups understand, manage, and leverage their intellectual property. Communitech, along with our partners North Forge and Invest Ottawa, deliver Elevate IP services and support to startups in Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. So who is Elevate IP for? So the current eligibility criteria for startups is that they must be headquartered in Ontario, Manitoba, or Saskatchewan. They must be CCPC, so Canadian Controlled Private Corporation. They must have less than 500 employees, and the IP protections to be acquired must be owned by the startup and not the individual. So there's three types of program offerings within the Elevate IP program. The first is the awareness and education tier. So this is for startups that are new to IP. So our team will provide the startups with access to foundational information, resources, available workshops, and programs that essentially better help them better understand the functional uses of IP throughout the growth of a business. Then we have our tier 2, which is developing IP strategies. So this is for startups that are at a stage where strategy is needed. So our team will help connect you to an IP expert who will then provide coaching and information to startups to help them essentially access the resources required to develop sound IP strategies. And then last but not least, we have our implementing strategies, tier 3. So this is for startups with IP implementation activities that are implementation ready. So our team will connect startups with an IP service provider who will then guide them through the process of undertaking strategic IP protection and advancement. So a quick overview, a more simplified overview of the process that startups would go through if engaging with the Elevate IP program. Firstly, they would register a profile and fill in an application on the Elevate IP portal. They then will go through an assessment process, and a tier will then be identified, either tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 1 education and awareness services are free and available to all startups who register on the profile. For tier 2, or tier 3, the startup then gets connected to a service provider, and the project work starts from there. So Elevate IP differs a little bit from other government-funded programs. So we can fund patent filings and trademark registrations. There is a 0% co-investment for Tier 2 strategy development. And there's access up to 100K in funding, so 25K for Tier 2, and then 75K for Tier 3. There's also access to our online portal to apply and engage with Tier 1 services, such as our webinars and learning pathways. So the best way to engage with the Elevate IP program is to visit the landing page. We will put in these links in the chat so that they're available to you, but you can find more information about the Elevate IP program on the landing page. There is also an opportunity to book an information session with our ecosystem engagement manager to learn more. And lastly, like I mentioned, the best way to engage with that program is also by registering a profile on the Elevate IP portal, where you will get access to all of our Tier 1 services, such as workshops and training sessions. And then you can also apply for Tier 2 and Tier 3. So thanks so much, and over to you, Josée.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thanks, Alex. Share my presentation. Okay, it's great to be here to speak with you about your intellectual property strategy. I think one of the things I hear a lot from startup founders is they don't have time and they don't think they have intellectual property yet, so they're going to focus on IP later when they have funding. Or I hear things like, I don't have a patent, so I don't need an IP strategy, or, oh, I already have a patent, so I don't, I have an IP strategy. And those things are definitely not, they don't equate to an IP strategy. And there are a lot of things that can be done very early on for little cost that will really help you protect your intellectual property in the future. And so my advice to all of the startups I work with is, get some IP education, learn the IP basics as early as you can, and then start an IP strategy as early as you can. Obviously, if you don't have any funding, your strategy will look different than a company that has a lot of funding to apply to this, but some very simple things that you can do early on will really help you later. So today I'm going to go through the IP basics. So kudos to you for being here and for learning this important information that will help you with, now and in the future. So I'll go through the IP basics, and then I'll talk a little bit about all the facets that go into an IP strategy, because it's much more than just patents. So speaking of patents, let's talk about what a patent protects. So you'll probably know that a patent will protect an invention, but what does that mean really? So patents are meant to protect the functionality of something. So they don't protect the way it looks or how pretty it is, et cetera. They really protect the function. So you can protect a machine, a manufacturer, you can protect drugs, though they're known as compositions of matter. And they're really a very powerful form of IP protection. They can also protect software innovations in certain circumstances, but they don't protect the code. So the patent office never wants to see your software code. The way that you would submit an invention for a software patent is through flow charts and process diagrams. So you're showing what the software is doing and explaining how you're getting the software to do that, but not in the language of code. So in order to be patentable, something has to be what we call statutory subject matter. So it has to be something that is eligible for a patent. So if you come up with a new mathematical equation, that is not statutory subject matter. You cannot get a patent on a mathematical equation, for example. In the US, the rules are a little bit different, although overall similar to Canadian rules. But the US, if you're speaking to a patent agent about a US application, you'll hear things like, you can't patent a law of nature in the US. And you can't in Canada either, but the language is a little bit different. So in order to be eligible for a patent, it has to be one of those categories, something that is in that realm. It has to be new. So if it's already available to the public, the patent office doesn't want to give someone a patent on it and take it away from the public. So it has to be something new. It has to be something useful. And it has to be something non-obvious. So this one's a little bit tricky. It could be new. So if I submit a patent application for a chair with 16 legs, maybe they've never seen that before. So it would actually meet the novelty test. But would it be non-obvious? Would it be inventive to do that? Probably not. So the patent office is also going to assess that, and that can be a little bit problematic for companies, especially startup companies. Patents are jurisdictionally based. So if you have a patent in Canada, then no one in Canada can make, use, or sell that invention. However, anyone in the US can read your patent application, or your granted patent, I should say, and make and use and sell that invention anywhere else in the world. So if you want to be you have to be judicious about where you're going to apply for patents and make sure that you protect all the jurisdictions that are relevant to you, where you're making your invention, where you're doing your R&D, where you're selling. And you might want to be very strategic and look at where your competitors are doing those activities. And if you can get a patent on a technology in their jurisdictions, even if you're not selling there, they would be limited from copying your invention into their markets. So something to consider as you're figuring out where you want patents. Patents are good for 20 years from the date of filing. So if it takes you 5 years to get the patent granted, then your term is only 15 years left. And they can be very costly to obtain and maintain. So it can cost, 15 to 30K to file in one country. The more complex the innovation is, or the more crowded the space, then it can be more expensive to get that patent through. And it can cost a lot of money to maintain an extensive patent portfolio. So clients who are using Elevate IP funds, for example, to obtain patents in many different countries, might be tempted to just file everywhere they can. But they have to keep in mind that those maintenance fees to keep those patents going are going to pile up. And so again, you have to be very judicious in which jurisdictions you're filing in and know how much that's going to cost you year over year. A few things that you should know about patents. So if you file a patent application anywhere, pretty much most countries are part of the same system of treaty, the same treaty that allows other countries to recognize another country's patent application. So that would mean that you are patent pending. You have filed a patent application and you have the opportunity, if you follow the right timelines, to move that patent application through the system and obtain patents in various jurisdictions. But you don't have a granted patent yet, so you're patent pending. Once the patent grants, you have a granted patent on that technology in that specific jurisdiction. The rules in the different jurisdictions are all slightly different. So you may get a patent in Canada and not in the US, or vice versa, depending on the subject matter and the rules around that subject matter. There is something called the PCT, or the International Patent Application System, that you may have heard of. And one misconception about that is that it gets you an international patent. So there is no international patent. It's simply a mechanism that you can use to streamline your application process in a lot of different countries. It's a bit more efficient. It's a bit more costly upfront, but then it can save you money down the line because you have this more efficient mechanism for actually downloading your patent application into various countries that you're interested in. Once that international patent application does get downloaded, each country will evaluate it on its own merits based on its own laws. And so at that point, it's as if you had filed it in all of those countries individually. Patent strategy can be very complex. One thing I often suggest to my clients is, if you're going for a patent, really, really understand and make sure you know why you want the patent. What is it that you want it to do for you? And then make sure that you're going to get that outcome. So just something to keep in mind, and something to have really in-depth discussions with your patent agent, because that can be very disappointing if you end up getting a patent that doesn't really cover the technology that's core to your business, or you submit a patent application that has a very small chance of being granted, and then it doesn't grant, but now those patent applications become public. And so you've basically given everyone your invention if the patent doesn't end up granting. So trade secrets are kind of the flip side of patents. Sometimes you have technology that cannot be patented. So let's say you've put together a really extensive database that you're using to train your machine learning algorithm. A database cannot be patented. So you would want to keep that as a trade secret. If you do have something that could be patented, but you think you could get more value out of it by keeping it as a trade secret, you can do that as well if it's possible. So any information that provides you with a competitive advantage can be a trade secret. So even information about what doesn't work can be a trade secret. If you had to do 2 years of testing to find something that works, then all of those dead-end paths that you went down are part of your trade, could be part of your trade secrets. If you handed that knowledge over to a competitor, they could skip over those 2 years of testing, right? And they would know what doesn't work. So even that can be considered a trade secret. Trade secret includes know-how. The best example I have of this is Dell computers in the 80s. They became very, very successful they didn't invent anything really. They just put together a bunch of processes or methods by which they took off-the-shelf computer parts and managed to get them shipped out to customers quickly. This was obviously pre-Amazon. And so they were very successful. And I've even read that Walmart tried to infiltrate Dell just to understand how they did this. And so Dell was keeping those methods that they used as a trade secret. You do have to protect your trade secrets. One framework I usually give for thinking about this is imagine, that you're a competitor who wants to know your company's trade secrets, and you're willing to do some maybe dishonest things to get them. What would you do? How would you go about it? And then use that, train of thought to put in place methods by which you would stop that competitor from getting access to your trade secrets. So little things like cybersecurity measures, if you have very, very critical trade secrets. I have some clients who actually provide secure encrypted laptops to their employees that they are only allowed to use for work purposes. Things like that. So you have to think about those features. The protection should be commensurate with the value of the trade secret. Unlike patents, a trade secret never expires. So if you have something that is going to be foundational technology for 30 years, then maybe you want to keep it as a trade secret if you can, because it'll bring value to you for 30 years, whereas a patent would lapse in 20. If it's something that is very important for a short-term period, maybe everyone will be wanting to use this technology for the next 2 years, but then people will move on to something else. Might not make sense to file a patent on it if you can keep it as a trade secret, because you won't even have your patent by then. By the time you get around to getting your patent, you're already on to the next thing. A couple of downsides to trade secrets: if someone else comes up with the same secret independently, there's nothing you can do. They're free to use it and even maybe patent it. And they often have less cachet than patents when it comes to investors. Although in my experience, you might really have more benefits from a trade secret than from a patent. You might need to educate your investors about that if they are not understanding why you don't have patents. So trademarks help distinguish the goods or services of one person from those of another. So you see this symbol here, and I think pretty much everyone in the world knows when they see it, oh, that's Nike. So this is a very powerful trademark that Nike has. You can trademark your company name, product names, taglines, logos. They do have to be used to be valid long-term, so you have to make sure to keep using them or risk losing them. And a registered trademark must be renewed by paying a fee. In Canada and the US, it's every 10 years. But one of the benefits of trademarks is that you can renew them indefinitely. So they don't, as long as you pay your renewal fees, you can continue having the benefits of that trademark registration. It's a lot less expensive than patents. But like patents, they are also jurisdictional. So if you only file your trademark in Canada, anyone in the US is free to copy it. So you have to think about all the jurisdictions that you're interested in. Oh, I should also mention that there are kind of two tracks to trademark protection: the common law track and the registration track. So just by using your trademark, even if you don't register it, you are obtaining some limited protection. So if you have been doing business under a specific company name for 5 years, and the people in your area recognize your name and they know your business, then you might be able to stop someone else from setting up shop in that same area using the same business, where people would be confused about whether they were affiliated with you or not. But trademark registration is much more powerful, and it does protect you throughout the whole country. So with a trademark registration, you could stop somebody who wasn't in your region, for example, from also using that same trademark for similar goods or services as what you're selling. So there are definite benefits to trademark registration. So copyright keeps others from being able to copy your works. So literary works, artistic works, etc., including software. So software does have copyright protection, although it is somewhat limited. So It's important to realize that copyright protection on software only protects the exact code line by line. So if you have a code and you've written a code for a program that does it accomplishes something, anyone else who sees what it's accomplishing and says, oh, that's a good read, I want to do that too, they are free to go and write their own software to do that to accomplish that same result. So they would not be infringing your copyright if they did that. So that's where patents for software can be very interesting, because that patent would keep them from doing the same thing you're doing, no matter how they do it, as long as your patent protection is robust enough to do that. So copyright protects the expression of the idea and not the idea itself. If I paint a painting of a sunrise, no one can copy my painting and sell it, but they can paint their own painting of a sunrise standing at the exact same place at the exact same time of day. That's fine. I can't stop them. One thing that is sometimes misunderstood is that copyright doesn't need to be registered. So it can be, but in Canada here, you don't even have to submit the work to the Copyright Office. You just tell them you've created something and you get a certificate. And so I personally don't typically recommend registering copyright, especially for software that you're changing continuously. So something to think about. It's not very expensive to do, but I think the benefits are pretty minimal. In Canada and the US now, the life of the author is 70 years. Canada, apologies, I haven't updated the slide, but Canada recently changed that to match the US. So 70 years after the author is deceased, and in certain corporate situations, it can be up to 95 years in the US. Something to keep in mind as business owners is that the creator is usually the owner. And so if you have contractors who are writing code for you, for example, the contractor might actually own the copyright. You have to make sure that your contract specifically says that they assign the copyright to your corporation. So you want to be very sure about that. The other little twist with copyright in Canada is known as moral rights. So someone who creates a work has both copyright and moral rights in that work. Moral rights allow them to be identified as the author or not identified if they don't want to be. It also gives them the right to object if they don't like the way the work is being used. And so it's important to have moral rights waivers in your employee and contractor agreements, so that that never comes back to be an issue. They can't assign moral rights to someone else, but they can waive them. And you can use a little copyright symbol, even if the work's not registered. So I've given an example here and highlighted at the bottom of the slide. Industrial designs, that's what they're called in Canada. In the US, they're known as design patents. So these are the types of IP protection that protect the look of something or its packaging. So this can be an interesting one as well for computer implemented inventions, because they can protect the graphical user interface or the GUI. These types of rights last for 10 to 15 years in Canada and 15 in the US. Like with patents, it has to be novel. So it has to be a new design. And both patents and industrial designs or design patents cannot have been disclosed to the public, generally speaking. So if you have an invention or a design that you want to get protection for, you should do everything you can not to disclose it to anyone until you have filed your patent or your industrial design. Now, Canada and the US, we do have a 1-year grace period, where if you do disclose it, you still have a year to file your patent application. But other countries around the world, Europe, Japan, China, don't have that grace period. So if you disclose your invention here in Canada, and you will have barred yourself from being able to get a patent in those other countries, although, as I said, you'd still have 1 year in Canada and the US to file a patent application. So it's very important, if you think you have something patentable, to talk to a patent agent about timing before you disclose it. Like patents and trademarks, industrial designs are jurisdictional, and they are much less expensive than patents. So, $2,000 to $5,000, you can get an industrial design filing. All right, so that was a quick primer on the different types of intellectual property. Happy to answer questions at the end if there are any about that. I'm just going to go and talk a little bit about what I believe should be in an IP strategy as a startup. So first of all, why do you even need to worry about this? Well, the 2019 IP Canada report showed that SMEs that have formal IP are 3 times more likely to have expanded domestically, over 4 times more likely to have expanded internationally, almost twice as likely to have high growth, and they are more likely to request financing and to receive higher amounts. So thinking about your IP is definitely important. Having an IP strategy will help you identify your IP. I get a lot of clients who aren't sure which category something falls in, or if it is even, if they can even protect it. And so that work is not as easy as it might sound. So putting that strategy together helps with that. It helps you figure out how to best to protect it, maximize your revenue, keep others from infringing. It can help you identify infringers. It can help you make sure you're not infringing someone else's IP. So if you are doing something that infringes a valid patent, even if you don't have any patents, you can be infringing that patent. So that's something to be aware of and something to look into before you get too far down the road with that particular product. I feel that startups have an advantage that they're more agile and they can pivot more easily. And so figuring out if you're infringing something early on can help you get around that and make sure that you don't infringe it moving forward. Having that IP strategy can also help you identify opportunities to exploit your IP. So I have a client company who came up with something interesting that wasn't really related to their core technology, but they had a policy of patenting anything that looked interesting. And so they filed the patent, and then they just kind of had it in a database. And one day, one of their advisors looked at that patent and said, hey, this is really interesting. There's a huge market for this type of technology. And so based on that conversation, they started doing a little more digging, and they discovered that, yeah, this technology is really important in this other field. And so they actually ended up spinning off a company for that. It's doing very, very well. So without an IP strategy in place, one, wouldn't have even identified that as a potentially patentable innovation. And 2, they wouldn't have had that advisor review of their intellectual property and identified that as a possible source of revenue for them. So typically when you're putting together an IP strategy, sometimes if you go to a patent agent, the patent agent is obviously looking at what's patentable here and how many patents can we get out of this. But an IP strategy is much, much more than that. And so sometimes you have to do a little bit more work in terms of figuring out what your IP strategy should look like. And it should always be linked to your business objectives. Companies that have the same types of products may have vastly different IP strategies depending on what they're after. So some of these categories, I would say, are really important. So understanding the different types of IP, so what you're doing today, learning more about basics, there's more than just patents. So figuring out, making sure that you understand those differences. Then going back to your own business and identifying all of your IP. So you probably have lots of things that are copyrighted. You have trademarks, I'm sure, even if they're not registered. You may have you almost certainly have some trade secrets. You may have patents already, but you may have potentially patentable inventions. So figuring that out, inventorying everything so that you can keep track of it moving forward is really important. Then looking at those types, the different intellectual property assets that you have and figuring out what is the best way to protect it for you. So talked a little bit about trade secrets versus patents. Maybe you have a software innovation that could be patented. Now you need to figure out, does it make more sense to patent it or keep it as a trade secret? And so having that discussion internally, figuring that out is really, really important. You want to make sure that you own your IP. This is so critical. I see a lot of companies where ownership is not clear-cut whatsoever. So if you're working with a university, with researchers, with a partner, your own employees, right, in certain circumstances, they may own some of the IP if you don't have the right contracts and agreements in place. So a deep review of all of that is really, really important to make sure that you actually own the IP that you create. Looking at the competitive landscape is also part of your IP strategy. Who else has IP assets in your field? How are they protecting them? What do they do? One example I can give of why this is important. So let's say you have a large competitor who tends to steal innovations from startups, right? That happens. So then you need to go into your IP strategy with that in mind. On the other hand, maybe you have a large competitor who loves to buy the intellectual property that a startup has. Then, the patents that they have. In that scenario, if your end objective is an exit and you'd love to be acquired by that large company, then you too will want to develop as many patents as you can to be looked on more favorably by that large company when it comes to an acquisition. So all of these pieces fall into that. The jurisdictions that you should be thinking about, as I talked about earlier, you need to protect your brand. So trademarks, and those are important. As I said, registered trademarks are much more powerful. And domain names. So this one is something that a lot of people overlook. So they'll have, companyname.ca. But what we see is that as companies get more known in their space and as they get more successful, we actually have domain name squatters who go and buy. So they'll buy the companyname.com, companyname.ai, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had folks who've had to pay between $500 to $20,000 to get those domain names back as they've become more successful. Domain names are really, really inexpensive. Typically, some of them can be more pricey, but generally speaking, they can be very inexpensive. And so buying up all of those domain names as soon as you can help protect you from this type of predatory behavior in the future. Terms of use, terms of service, end user license agreement, licenses. These are also kind of overlooked aspects of intellectual property. If you don't have a patent and you can't protect it as a trade secret, so for example, you need to install the software on your customers' servers, and you can't have a patent on it, your customer could be free to do what they want with that software. So then you fall back onto the contract that you have with them, or the contract that you have with users of an app, for example. So you really want to put some thought into these types of contracts or licenses to figure out what you're okay with users doing and what you're not okay with them doing, and make sure it's all covered. Customers have a very creative bent sometimes, and they find ways to use products that the creators never thought of. Sometimes that's fantastic, but sometimes it can be to the detriment of the creator. And certainly your competitors, if they can, pretend to be a customer and get access, could potentially do things. So you want to make sure that you really take a close look at these, because it's a contract that you have, and the contract could be your best form of protection for certain types of innovations. Finally, you want to look at your IP budget. As I mentioned, intellectual property can be quite expensive, so you want to have a good sense of what costs are coming down the line. If you file 10 patents in 10 different countries, you're going to have to prosecute and maintain those, and it's probably going to take a number of years. So you want to make sure that you have the funding available to you, or at least have an understanding of what those requirements are going to be. And then finally, I call this IP systems. I don't think anybody else really does, but IP systems. So putting in place features within your organization that, for example, you train your employees on what the trade secrets are and how to protect them. They know the difference between what's patented and what's a trade secret. Having employees who are onboarded sign robust employee agreements with IP assignment and non-disclosure clauses in them. Having a system where a departing employee is reminded of their obligation to keep your secrets before they leave, and that they turn in all the material that they've had. So all of these pieces fall into IP systems that a company with a robust IP strategy should implement. And a lot of these are much easier to start earlier on than to try to, retroactively impose when you've got 20, 50, 100 employees, and now you're trying to scramble to put all of this in place. All right, so I think this was the last slide, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I don't see any questions right now in the box, but there was a question beforehand when somebody had signed up, and it was from Ashley. So they asked, I'm not sure if Kid Unified has any IP that can be secured. Would a color palette used in illustration be considered IP?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're kind of mixing your own colors. Does that make sense based on the question? That's a really good one. I think that that would be very challenging. It would not be patentable. If you have a specific process that you use, a series of colors chosen to use across all puzzles. Yeah, I think this is going to be challenging. A few things that come to mind for me would be if the packaging on the puzzles could be, if you have an interesting packaging, you know, you can package the puzzles to distinguish them from others' puzzles, and the packaging could incorporate the color profile, and that could be the subject of an industrial design if the actual box has an interesting look to it. So not just a cardboard rectangle, but you do something interesting there. Potential designs that way. And then of course the trademark associated with the puzzles. The puzzles, each puzzle itself would have copyright, so no one can copy that exact puzzle. But if somebody was to make a completely different, the subject matter of the puzzle is completely different, but the colors were the same, I think that that would be really, really challenging. Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't had that one yet, but I think that would be hard. You'd have to go protect things around it. And become sort of known for your puzzles generally that have that color, as opposed to protecting that color, if that makes sense.
I think she had just put another question in the box there, just saying that the colors were chosen to include the more kiddos with visual impairments in focus. Okay.
Yeah,
Does
so
anyone else-
that's just to add to that, that's really interesting because now you've kind of have a little bit of functionality there. It goes beyond just the aesthetics of it. And so I think it would be challenging, but maybe there would be something around that functionality, that why you're choosing those specific colors, or the process of choosing. Maybe it'd be a little bit challenging, but there might be something there. That's an interesting one.
Okay, and I have somebody that has raised their hand. I'm gonna allow them to talk here. I think you might be muted if you're asking your question. Oh, I think they're might have had to, their camera might have gone out, or their speaker, because it looked like they had just left. They might pop back in. But does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask in the meantime? You also can put it in the chat box or in the Q&A if you're more comfortable than talking out loud. Okay. So I think that might be it for questions then, if not anyone else has any questions that they'd like to get answered. So I guess we might be able to have a little bit of our Tuesday afternoon back for lunchtime if anyone has lunch around this time. So first I'd like to say thank you, Josée. And I know Rochelle's gone, but also thank you to her for the little intro in the beginning about Elevate IP. If anyone on the call today would like to connect with Josée, please reach out to myself, Alex Miller, and I can give you an introduction to them. I'll pop my email in the chat for everyone. Before you disappear, we're going to post a feedback form in the chat as well. Please click on it and share your thoughts on this session and the Toolkit Tuesday series in general. If there's a topic you'd like to present on, let us know. And also feel free to reach out to us via social media and tweet and post about your experience with us. We'll be mailing out a copy of this presentation and supporting documents in about 48 hours from now. This presentation will also be posted on YouTube for all your future viewing. In the meantime, please reach out if you need anything at all. A sincere thank you to Josée and Rochelle, to our Asign interpreters, Jocelyn and Jennifer, and to our sponsors and all of you. So just thanks for being here today. And I'm going to post the link in the chat now. Here. And I've also posted my email. So I think that's it.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Of course. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.